The idea of a camping trip was supposed to be a fun escape from the pressures of our senior year. It was Emily's idea. She always had a knack for adventure. So on a crisp October weekend, 4 of us, Emily, Jake, Mark, and I, packed our gear and headed to Whispering Pines, a dense forest known for its untouched beauty and eerie legends. The locals talked about strange disappearances, but we brushed them off as superstitious tales. We arrived at the edge of the forest in the late afternoon. The trees, tall and twisted, cast long shadows that seemed to reach out for us as we made our way along the narrow, winding path. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and an unsettling silence enveloped us. "This place is perfect," Emily declared, her enthusiasm unshaken. We set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. As night fell, we built a fire, its crackling flames providing a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. After dinner, we sat around the fire, sharing ghost stories and laughing at each other's attempts to scare. But as the night deepened, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The forest seemed to come alive, the trees whispering secrets to one another, their branches swaying without a breeze. "Do you hear that?" Jake asked suddenly, his eyes wide. We fell silent, straining to hear. At first there was nothing, just the crackle of the fire. Then faintly we heard it, a soft, almost melodic humming coming from deep within the forest. "It's probably just the wind," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. Emily, always the brave one, stood up. "Let's go check it out." Reluctantly, we grabbed our flashlights and followed her, the light from the fire growing dimmer with each step. The humming grew louder, more distinct, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The forest was darker here, the trees pressing in on us, their branches like skeletal fingers. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a small, ancient-looking cabin, half hidden by vines and moss. The humming was louder now, emanating from within. The windows were broken, and the door hung ajar, swaying slightly as if beckoning us inside. "We should go back," I whispered, but Emily was already moving towards the door. "Come on, don't be scared," she said, pushing it open with a creak. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. Our flashlights revealed old, rotting furniture and walls covered in strange symbols. The humming was louder here, almost deafening. In the center of the room was a large wooden chest, its lid slightly open. Emily approached the chest, curiosity in her eyes. "There's something in here," she said, reaching to open it fully. "Emily, don't," I shouted, but it was too late. As she lifted the lid, the humming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from the darkness within the chest, a shadowy figure emerged, its eyes glowing a sinister red. We stumbled back, terror gripping us. The figure rose, towering over us, its form shifting and writhing as if made of smoke. It whispered in a language I couldn't understand, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Run," Mark yelled, and we bolted from the cabin, the figure's whispers chasing us into the night. We raced through the forest, branches clawing at our clothes, roots threatening to trip us. The path back to our campsite seemed endless, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and I felt something cold brush against my arm. Finally, we burst into the clearing, gasping for breath. The fire was out, and our tents were torn to shreds. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, his voice shaking. We grabbed what little gear we could find and ran towards the car. The forest was alive with whispers, the trees seeming to lean in, their branches reaching out like hands trying to pull us back. The path twisted and turned, and I could feel the presence behind us growing closer with each step. Just when I thought we would never escape, we broke through the tree line and saw the car. We piled in, and Mark fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and we sped away, leaving Whispering Pines and its horrors behind. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of my house, the first sign of civilization we had seen in hours. We stumbled inside, collapsing on the living room floor, trying to catch our breath. What was that? Emily whispered, her face pale. I don't know. Jake replied, but we're never going back there. In the days that followed, we tried to put the experience behind us, but the whispers never left my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear them, calling to me from the depths of the forest. And I know that whatever we encountered in Whispering Pines is still out there waiting for its next victims. It was the end of summer, and my friends and I wanted one last adventure before heading off to different colleges. We chose a secluded spot in the Blackwood Forest, a place whispered about in local legends. People spoke of strange occurrences, but we dismissed them as tall tales meant to scare children. Besides, we were too old for ghost stories. The group consisted of me, Matt, the fearless leader, Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, James, the skeptic, and Lisa, the newest addition to our circle, always eager to prove herself. We loaded our backpacks with supplies and headed out early Saturday morning, the excitement of a weekend in nature buzzing among us. The hike to the campsite was beautiful, with the late summer sun filtering through the dense canopy of trees. We reached the spot by mid-afternoon, a small clearing near a placid lake. It was perfect. We set up our tents, gathered wood for a fire, and prepared for a night under the stars. As the sun set, the forest grew quiet, an almost eerie silence settling over the area. We built a roaring fire and sat around it, toasting marshmallows and sharing stories. James, ever the skeptic, scoffed at the tales of the Wendigo, creatures said to haunt these woods. "It's just a myth," he said, tossing a stick into the fire. "There's no such thing as monsters." "Maybe," Lisa replied, her eyes reflecting the flames. "But it's fun to be scared sometimes, right?" Just then, a chill wind blew through the clearing, making the fire flicker. Sarah shivered and pulled her jacket tighter around her. "Did it suddenly get colder?" she asked, looking around nervously. "It's just the wind," Matt said, but even he seemed uneasy. We decided to call it a night. The fire was dying down, and the forest felt oppressively dark. I crawled into my tent, the sounds of my friends settling in around me. I closed my eyes, hoping for a peaceful sleep, but an unsettling feeling nagged at me. Sometime in the night, I woke to the sound of rustling leaves. I lay still, listening. It was probably just an animal, I told myself. But the rustling grew louder, closer. I heard a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My heart pounded in my chest. I unzipped my tent, slowly peeking out. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows. I saw a figure moving at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the glow of the coals. It was tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The stories of the Wendigo flooded back to me. It was said to be a spirit of cannibalism, a creature that could possess humans and drive them to madness. I wanted to call out to my friends, but fear paralyzed me. The creature moved silently, its eyes scanning the clearing. It stopped and sniffed the air, its head snapping in my direction. I ducked back into my tent, praying it hadn't seen me. The rustling grew louder, and I heard the distinct sound of a tent zipper being opened. A scream pierced the night. Sarah's scream. I bolted out of my tent, adrenaline surging through me. The others were already out, their faces pale with terror. We saw the creature dragging Sarah into the forest, her screams growing fainter. "Sarah," Matt shouted, grabbing a burning stick from the fire and rushing towards the creature. James and I followed, our fear replaced by the need to save our friend. Lisa stayed behind, too frightened to move. We ran through the dense forest, the cold air biting at our skin. The creature was fast, and it moved through the trees with an unnatural grace. Sarah's screams were our guide, but they were growing weaker. I could barely see Matt ahead of me, his makeshift torch the only light in the suffocating darkness. "Over here," Matt yelled, but his voice was cut off by a horrifying growl. I reached the spot where he had fallen silent. Matt lay on the ground, unconscious with deep claw marks across his chest. The creature stood over him, its eyes glowing with malevolence. It turned its gaze towards me, and I felt a chill run through my soul. James and I brandished our sticks, trying to keep the creature at bay. It seemed almost amused, its mouth twisting into a grotesque smile. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged at James, knocking him to the ground. I swung my stick, hitting the creature, but it barely flinched. In the chaos, Sarah managed to break free. She stumbled towards me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Run," she screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the monster. We fled through the forest, the creature's growls echoing behind us. We burst into the clearing, breathless and terrified. Lisa was there, her eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" she asked. But there was no time to explain. "We have to get to the car," I said. We helped Matt to his feet, his face contorted with pain. Supporting him between us, we made our way through the forest, the creature's growls still echoing in the distance. Every shadow seemed to conceal our pursuer, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the car. We bundled Matt into the back seat, piled in, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas, tearing down the dirt road away from the forest. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of civilization. The first signs of dawn breaking on the horizon, we collapsed in exhaustion and relief, but the terror of that night would never leave us. Sarah's sobs filled the car, and I realized we had left James behind. The legends of the Wendigo were true, and we had narrowly escaped its clutches. We vowed never to speak of that night again, but the memory haunts me still. Whenever I close my eyes, I see those glowing eyes and hear Sarah's desperate screams. And I know that somewhere in the Blackwood Forest, the Wendigo still roams, waiting for its next victims.